I am Brielle Evans, 28 years old, a marketing executive who spent her entire life chasing the approval of two people who never seemed capable of giving it. My relationship with my perfectionist parents was always strained, but nothing prepared me for that devastating dinner when they openly admitted they regretted having me. Instead of arguing, I simply went home and packed. What they did not know was that I deliberately left my childhood diary behind the one that documented everything. Before I tell you how my parents collapsed in tears after finding my diary, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength after family betrayal. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, my childhood looked picture-perfect from the outside. Our sprawling colonial home with its manicured lawn and swimming pool was the envy of the neighborhood. My mother, Dr. Eleanor Evans, was a renowned cardiovascular surgeon at Hartford Hospital. My father, Richard Evans, was a corporate lawyer who represented some of the biggest companies in New England. They were respected, accomplished, and utterly devoted to excellence in every aspect of their lives. Unfortunately, that devotion to perfection extended to their expectations of me. From my earliest memories, I understood that good was never good enough. When I brought home an A- on my second-grade spelling test, my father looked at it with a slight frown and asked, "What happened to the plus?" When I won second place in the fourth-grade science fair, my mother nodded coolly and said, "Second is just the first loser, Brielle. Remember that." Their expectations were relentless, and their disappointment was constant. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, I excelled academically. I studied until midnight throughout middle school. I joined every club and academic team in high school. I practiced piano until my fingers cramped, not because I loved it, but because my parents believed musical training developed superior cognitive abilities. I ran track not because I enjoyed it, but because my father insisted that physical excellence complemented academic achievement. By senior year, I was valedictorian of my class. I earned a full scholarship to Cornell University, where I double majored in business and communications. I graduated summa cum laude. Each achievement earned nothing more than a nod or a brief, as expected from my parents. They attended my high school graduation only because it would have looked strange to their friends if they had not shown up. They skipped my college graduation entirely because my mother had a conference in Tokyo and my father had an important case. After college, I moved to Boston and secured a position at Horizon Marketing Group, one of the top firms in the Northeast. Over 6 years, I worked my way up from junior associate to senior marketing executive. Each promotion came with longer hours, more responsibility, and greater stress, but I thrived on the challenge. Work became my refuge, a place where effort resulted in tangible recognition. My personal life was less successful. I had a series of short relationships that inevitably collapsed under the weight of my workaholic tendencies and emotional unavailability. Therapists would later tell me I had an anxious attachment style resulting from my childhood, but at the time I simply thought I was too busy for love. That changed when I met Marcus Chen last year. He was a graphic designer who worked with my firm on a major campaign. Unlike previous boyfriends who were intimidated by my drive or tried to compete with my success, Marcus was secure in his own talents and genuinely supportive of mine. He noticed how I flinched when receiving compliments. He observed my obsessive preparation for presentations that were already perfect. He gently pointed out how I apologized for things that were not my fault. "You know you are allowed to just be human, right?" he asked me once, after I spent an entire Sunday redoing a presentation that was already approved. "The world will not end if everything is not perfect." It was such a simple statement, but it hit me like a revelation. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Susan Williams, who specialized in adult children of emotionally unavailable parents. Our weekly sessions were often painful as I unpacked a lifetime of conditional love and impossible standards. "Have you considered having an honest conversation with your parents about your childhood?" Dr. Williams asked after several months of therapy. "They would never listen," I replied automatically. "You might be surprised," she said. "People can change, especially when confronted with the impact of their behavior. Besides, this conversation would be for your healing regardless of their response." The idea terrified me, but it also offered a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, my parents could acknowledge how their perfectionism had affected me. Maybe we could build a healthier relationship. Maybe after 28 years, I could finally earn the unconditional love I had always craved. As if the universe heard my thoughts, my mother called the following day. This itself was unusual, as our communication typically consisted of brief text messages about holidays or family obligations. "Your father and I would like you to come for dinner this Saturday," she said without preamble. "We have not seen you in months." 4 months to be exact. We had last seen each other at Christmas, a stilted affair where we exchanged practical gifts and made awkward small talk about the weather and my cousins. "Is everything okay?" I asked immediately, assuming something was wrong. My parents never invited me over without a specific reason. "Everything is fine, Brielle. Can you come or not?" "Yes, I can come," I said, ignoring the flutter of anxiety in my chest. "Good. 6:30. Do not be late." After hanging up, I called Marcus. My parents invited me to dinner, out of nowhere. "That is great, babe," he said enthusiastically. "Maybe they are finally making an effort." I allowed myself to hope he was right. Perhaps they had been doing their own reflection. Perhaps they missed me. Perhaps they were finally ready to see me as an adult, worthy of their respect rather than a perpetual disappointment. I spent the next few days preparing for the dinner as though it were a crucial business presentation. I bought an expensive bottle of wine knowing my father prided himself on his knowledge of fine vintages. I purchased a beautiful orchid for my mother, remembering how she once mentioned admiring them. I rehearsed conversation topics, planning to share news about my recent promotion and my relationship with Marcus without sounding like I was seeking approval. I even practiced what I might say if the opportunity arose to discuss our relationship more deeply. I have been working through some issues in therapy related to our family dynamics. I would say calmly. I was hoping we could talk about that. As I drove to their house that Saturday evening, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. Part of me believed this dinner could represent a turning point in our relationship. A larger part expected disappointment. Nevertheless, I was determined to try for my own sake, if nothing else. I arrived at my childhood home at exactly 6:27, knowing my father considered being early a virtue and being late unforgivable. The house looked exactly as it always had, a monument to tasteful affluence. The only difference was the new Mercedes in the driveway replacing the BMW my father had driven for years. My mother answered the door, her posture perfect as always. At 58, she remained striking. Her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat chignon, her clothes expensive but conservative. "You are early," she said, accepting my kiss on her cheek with stiff politeness. "Your father is in his study finishing a call. He will join us shortly." I followed her into the kitchen where she was preparing a salad. The orchid I presented was acknowledged with a nod and placed on the counter, likely to be relegated to her study later, where it would receive precisely the right amount of light and water to thrive under her clinical care. "The wine is lovely," she said, examining the label of the bottle I brought. "We will save it for a special occasion." I swallowed my disappointment. This pattern was familiar from childhood, when gifts I carefully selected were set aside rather than enjoyed in the moment. My father emerged from his study 10 minutes later, his expression distracted. He gave me a brief pat on the shoulder that passed for affection in our family. "Brielle, you look well. Busy at work?" "Very busy," I replied. "I actually got promoted to senior executive last month." He said, checking his phone as it buzzed. "That is good. Excuse me, I need to answer this." He stepped away to take the call, and I helped my mother set the table, falling into the familiar rhythms of our emotionally distant dance. By the time we sat down to dinner, I had already abandoned any planned conversation about deeper emotional issues. The atmosphere was too cold, too formal. Dinner conversation revolved around safe topics. My mother discussed her latest research publication. My father mentioned a high-profile case he had recently won. I shared minimal details about my work projects. It was pleasant in the superficial way our interactions had always been, neither warm nor openly hostile. As my mother served dessert, an elaborate tiramisu she had purchased from an upscale bakery, my father finally asked about my personal life. "Your mother tells me you are seeing someone, an artist of some kind." "Marcus is a graphic designer," I corrected. "He is very talented. We have been together for nearly a year now." My mother raised an eyebrow. "A year? And you have not brought him to meet us?" The question stung with hypocrisy. My parents had shown zero interest in my previous relationships, and they had made no effort to know Marcus beyond asking his name during our Christmas conversation. "You have not asked to meet him," I pointed out. "Do not be petulant, Brielle," my father said. "You know we are interested in your life." Rather than arguing, I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of Marcus and me at a friend's wedding. They examined it with polite interest. "He seems nice," my mother said, her tone suggesting this was the highest praise she could offer. "What do his parents do?" "His father is an engineering professor at MIT, and his mother owns a successful interior design firm," I answered, hating that I felt the need to establish his pedigree to earn their approval. My father said, seemingly satisfied with this information. "Well, the Richardsons' son just made partner at Goldman Sachs, and the Wilsons' daughter was just appointed as a federal judge. You remember them from the country club." I did remember them, other children of successful parents who were paraded before me as examples of true achievement. No matter what I accomplished, there was always someone doing more, achieving faster, climbing higher. "I am also seeing a therapist," I said suddenly, desperate to redirect the conversation. "She is helping me work through some anxiety issues." My parents exchanged a look I could not quite interpret. "Therapy," my father said dismissively. "Everyone is in therapy these days. In my day, we just dealt with our problems." "Perhaps that is why your generation has such high rates of alcoholism and divorce," I replied before I could stop myself. A tense silence followed. My mother cleared her throat. "Speaking of the Wilsons, their daughter Rebecca just had her second child, a boy this time. They are over the moon." The message was clear: my personal growth was not a topic of interest. I sat quietly as they discussed their friends' children's accomplishments, marriages, and grandchildren. The subtext was equally clear. When would I provide them with the conventional successes they could brag about at their country club? Finally, I could not take it anymore. Years of therapy had given me just enough courage to ask the question that had haunted me my entire life. "Are you ever proud of me?" I asked quietly. My parents looked startled by the directness of the question. "What do you mean?" my mother asked. "I mean exactly what I said. Are you ever proud of me? Of anything I have done?" My father set down his dessert fork with precision. "Of course we are proud when you accomplish things, Brielle. That goes without saying. But it does not go without saying I insisted. That is the problem. You never say it. You never have." My mother sighed. "We did not believe in excessive praise. We thought it would make you soft, complacent. So instead you just pointed out every flaw and ignored every success." "We pushed you to excellence," my father said, his tone hardening. "And you have done well enough. You have a good job. You are self-sufficient." "Well enough," I repeated. "Is that all you can say about my life?" My father's jaw tightened. "What do you want Brielle A. Parade for doing what adults are supposed to do, for meeting basic expectations?" I wanted parents who showed up to my graduations, who called on my birthday without being reminded, who asked about my life because they cared not to compare me to the Wilsons' daughter. The room grew very still. My father exchanged another look with my mother, something unspoken passing between them. When he spoke again, his voice was coldly analytical. "You know, Eleanor and I have discussed this, and I will be honest with you. There are times when we regret having children." The words hit me like a physical blow. My mother did not contradict him. "Richard," she said quietly. Not in protest, but in caution. "No, she wants honesty," he continued. "The truth is, Eleanor and I were extraordinarily gifted individuals with promising careers. Having a child, even just one, required sacrifices. Eleanor could have been chief of surgery by now. I could have been a federal judge or entered politics. We gave up certain paths to provide you with an excellent upbringing." My mother nodded. "We expected that our superior genetics and resources would produce exceptional results. We provided you with every advantage, every opportunity for excellence." I sat frozen, unable to process the clinical way they were discussing my existence, as though I were a disappointing investment rather than their daughter. "And while you have done adequately," my father continued, "we sometimes wonder if the trade-off was worth it. You have achieved a certain level of conventional success, but nothing truly extraordinary. Nothing that would not have been accomplished by thousands of other, reasonably intelligent, hardworking people. We had hoped for more, my mother added, her voice, gentle but devastating. Perhaps our expectations were unrealistic. But yes, there have been moments when we questioned our decision to prioritize parenthood over our full career potential. I felt strangely calm as the words washed over me, confirming what I had always suspected but never wanted to believe. My existence was a disappointment to them, a regret. I see, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Thank you for your honesty. This does not mean we do not care for you, my mother added, as though offering a consolation prize. You are our daughter. A biological fact that apparently brings you more regret than joy, I said, folding my napkin neatly and placing it beside my plate. I should go now. Do not be dramatic, Brielle, my father said. We are simply having an adult conversation. Yes, we are, I agreed. And now that conversation is over. I stood up, collected my purse, and walked to the door with a composure that surprised even me. Neither of them followed me. Thank you for dinner, I said formally from the doorway, speaking to them as I would to distant acquaintances. Good night. The drive home passed in a blur. I felt nothing at first, a perfect numbness that protected me from the full impact of their words. By the time I reached my apartment, however, the numbness was giving way to a pain so acute it felt physical. I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love and approval of people who fundamentally regretted my existence. I walked into my apartment in a daze, mechanically hanging up my coat and placing my keys in the bowl by the door. The space around me, a place I had carefully decorated and maintained, suddenly felt foreign. Every object, from the immaculate white sofa to the precisely aligned books on my shelves, reflected my lifelong attempt to create order and perfection, to be worthy of love that was never freely given. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. A strange calm had settled over me, not peace, but the eerie stillness that follows catastrophic revelation. My parents regretted having me. The truth I had always suspected but desperately denied had finally been spoken aloud. In that moment of painful clarity, I made a decision. 2 weeks ago, I had received a job offer from West Coast Innovations, a cutting-edge marketing firm in Seattle. The position offered more creative freedom, better pay, and a complete change of scenery. I had been hesitating partly because of Marcus, but mostly because some childish part of me still craved my parents' approval of my career decisions. That hesitation evaporated instantly. I would take the job. I would move across the country. I would start fresh in a place where no one knew me as the perpetually disappointing daughter of Eleanor and Richard Evans. I pulled out my phone and sent an email to the hiring manager at West Coast Innovations, accepting the position and asking if I could start in 2 weeks, rather than the originally discussed month. Then, I called Marcus. The dinner went that badly, huh? He asked when he heard my voice. They told me they regret having me, I said, without preamble. That I was a disappointment who never lived up to their superior genetics. Jesus, Brielle, he breathed. That is messed up. Do you want me to come over? No, I said. I need to be alone tonight. But I have made a decision. I am taking the Seattle job. Silence stretched between us. Marcus and I had discussed the possibility of long distance, of him potentially following me once he wrapped up his current projects. But we both knew how difficult that would be. I understand, he said finally. Are you sure this is not a reaction to what they said? It is absolutely a reaction to what they said, I admitted. But that does not make it wrong. I need a fresh start, Marcus. I need to build a life that is not centered around earning approval I will never get. After we hung up, I pulled a suitcase from my closet and began methodically sorting through my belongings. I would take only what I truly needed or wanted. The rest could be sold, donated, or discarded. As I worked, memories surfaced like bubbles in still water. My 6th grade piano recital where I performed Chopin flawlessly, only to find my parents had not bothered to attend because my mother had a dinner with colleagues. My high school track meet where I broke the school record for the 400-meter dash and looked up to see empty seats where they should have been. My college acceptance letters met with nods and reminders about maintaining my scholarship. Each memory sharpened my resolve. I had spent 28 years trying to fill a bottomless pit of parental expectation. I was done. When I reached my bookshelf, I found myself holding a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn with age. My childhood diary kept faithfully from ages 8 to 16. I had nearly forgotten its existence tucked away between college textbooks and professional development books. I sat on the floor, the diary heavy in my hands. Did I really want to revisit those years? The pain was still so fresh from tonight's dinner. Did I need to add childhood wounds to the mix? Curiosity won out. I opened to the first page dated September 3rd when I was 8 years old. The handwriting was large and careful, each letter formed with deliberate precision. Dear Diary, today I won the science fair. My volcano was the best one. Because it really exploded with real red lava, it was baking soda and vinegar with food coloring, too. Miss Johnson gave me a blue ribbon and everyone clapped. I wish Mom and Dad came to see it. Mom had surgery and Dad had a meeting. I saved my volcano to show them, but when I got home they were too tired to look at it. Maybe tomorrow they will want to see it. They never did look at that volcano. I remembered waiting days carrying it carefully from my room each morning, hoping they would take just a moment to acknowledge my achievement. After a week, the papier-mâché began to crack, and I threw it away, blue ribbon and all. I flipped through more pages, each entry a small testament to a child desperate for approval. Perfect report cards met with criticism of the 1 A-. Dance recitals attended but forgotten immediately. Awards and achievements acknowledged only with increased expectations for the next performance. As the entries progressed into my early teens, the tone changed. The desperate hope for approval began to give way to resignation then, to a dawning recognition of the abnormality of my parents' behavior. An entry from age 13 caught my attention. I went to Emma's house after school today. Her mom made us cookies and asked about my day. When Emma showed her mom her math test with a B+, her mom hugged her and said she was proud of her for trying her best. She did not ask why it was not an A or tell Emma that B+ was mediocre. I almost cried right there in their kitchen. Is that what normal parents are like? Why are mine so different? By 14, I was documenting what I now recognized as emotional neglect and verbal abuse. The constant criticism, the impossibly high standards, the withholding of affection as punishment for perceived failure. At 15, I wrote about my first meeting with a school counselor who suggested family therapy and my parents' dismissive response. Dad said therapists are for weak people who cannot handle reality. Mom said our family does not need outsiders interfering. When I tried to explain how I feel, Dad interrupted and said feelings are irrelevant to success. What matters are actions and results. The final entry, written just after my 16th birthday, hit me the hardest. I realize now that I will never be enough for them. No accomplishment will ever make them love me the way parents are supposed to love their children. I cannot keep destroying myself trying to earn something that should have been freely given. From now on, I will work hard for myself, not for them. I will find people who value me for who I am, not just what I achieve. I promise myself this. I closed the diary, tears streaming down my face. That 16-year-old girl had been wiser than the woman I became. Somewhere along the way, despite my resolution, I had fallen back into the pattern of seeking their approval. I had chosen my college major with their preferences in mind. I had pursued a prestigious career partly to impress them. I had continued the exhausting cycle of achievement and disappointment. As I sat surrounded by half-packed boxes, an idea formed. I would leave this diary behind when I moved. Not accidentally, but deliberately. I would leave it for my parents to find, along with a note explaining why I was cutting contact. Let them read the words of the child they had damaged. Let them see the pattern from my perspective. It felt both terrifying and liberating, the thought of finally speaking my complete truth to them, even if only through the words of my younger self. I would highlight specific entries, the ones that most clearly illustrated the emotional toll of their parenting. I would force them to confront what they had done. With renewed purpose, I returned to packing. I called the Seattle office the next morning and confirmed I could start in 2 weeks. I began researching apartments, focusing on neighborhoods that seemed nothing like the Connecticut suburb where I grew up. I wanted color diversity life, everything my sterile childhood home had lacked. Marcus came over that evening, bringing takeout and quiet support. We talked about possibilities for our relationship, neither making promises nor giving up entirely. I think this is brave, he said as he helped me box up kitchen items. Scary as hell, but brave. It does not feel brave, I admitted. It feels like running away. There is a difference between running away and walking away, he said. You are not running from something you cannot face. You are walking toward a life you actually want. His distinction stayed with me as I continued preparing for my move. I was not fleeing in panic, but making a deliberate choice to prioritize my well-being over a toxic family connection. The difference was subtle but profound. Over the next few days, I reread my diary in its entirety, a chronological record of a childhood defined by conditional love and impossible standards. Each entry reinforced my decision to leave not just Boston, but the psychological prison I had inhabited for 28 years. The entries from age 8 were particularly heartbreaking in their innocence and optimism. Despite consistent disappointment, I continued to believe that the next achievement would finally earn me the love and attention I craved. Dear Diary, today I got my report card. All A pluses except for handwriting, which was an A-. I showed Mom and Dad at dinner. Dad asked why the handwriting grade was not higher. I tried to explain that Miss Johnson is really strict about handwriting, but Dad said that was no excuse for mediocrity. Mom said sloppy writing indicates sloppy thinking. I practiced my handwriting for 2 hours tonight. My hand hurts, but maybe next time I will get all A+ and they will be happy. They never were happy, no matter how perfect my performance. By age 9, I was beginning to internalize their impossible standards. I won the spelling bee today, but I almost missed the word necessary. I got it right, but I hesitated. Dad always says hesitation shows weakness. I did not tell them about almost missing it. I just said I won. Dad said winning was the minimum expectation given my vocabulary advantages. Next time I will make sure to win without hesitating on any words. At 10, I documented overhearing a conversation that haunted me for years afterward. I heard Mom and Dad talking about me when they thought I was asleep. They were comparing me to Dr. Wilson's daughter Melissa, who skipped 2 grades and is already taking high school classes, even though she is only 11. Dad said they had given me every advantage, but I was still performing within normal parameters instead of exceeding all metrics like they had hoped. Mom said maybe their genetic combination had not produced the exceptional results they anticipated. They talked about me like I was a science experiment that did not work out right. I stayed really quiet so they would not know I heard. By 11, my diary entries showed an increasing determination to earn their love through accomplishment, a pattern that would define much of my life. I am going to win the regional math competition next month. I am studying 2 extra hours every day. Dad said the Peterson's son won it last year, and he is not even that smart, so I should definitely be able to win. If I do, maybe they will take me out for ice cream like Emma's parents do when she does something good. Or maybe they will just say good job and mean it. I would be happy with that too. I did win that competition. There was no ice cream, no good job. Just a nod and a reminder that regional was less impressive than state and state less impressive than national. The entries from age 12 revealed the beginning of my anxiety issues. I had another bad feeling at school today. My heart started beating really fast during the history test, and I could not breathe right. I had to put my head down on my desk. Mrs. Taylor asked if I needed to see the nurse, but I said no because I did not want to miss the test. The bad feelings are happening more now. I do not tell Mom and Dad because they would say I am being dramatic or weak. Dad says anxiety is just fear of failure and the solution is to never fail. At 13, my awareness of my parents' abnormal behavior grew more acute. We had family life class today and the teacher talked about different parenting styles. She described parents who are very strict and have super high expectations and never show approval as authoritarian, and said this can cause problems for kids like low self-esteem and anxiety. Everyone looked at me during that part. I pretended to take notes, but really I was trying not to cry. I always thought maybe all parents were like mine, and other kids just did not talk about it. But now I think maybe my parents are different in a bad way. By 14, my entries became more analytical, documenting patterns of behavior with increasing clarity. Things that make my parents disappointed in me: scores under 95% speaking without being spoken to at their dinner parties, showing emotion, asking for help, mentioning other parents' behaviors, suggesting family activities. needing new clothes, having friends over, making noise, being sick, wanting their attention. Things that make my parents pleased with me, perfect scores awards that they can mention to colleagues, being completely self-sufficient, staying out of their way, requiring nothing from them emotionally or physically. When I write it all out like this, it seems really messed up. At 15, I had my first experience with therapy cut short by my parents' intervention. The school counselor, Miss Rivera, called me to her office today because my English teacher was concerned about my essay on family dynamics. Miss Rivera asked a lot of questions about my parents and how they treat me. She used words like emotional neglect and narcissistic tendencies. She wanted my parents to come in for a family session. I knew they would never agree, but I said she could call them. They were furious. Dad called the principal and said Miss Rivera was unprofessional and should be reprimanded for making accusations. Mom said I had obviously exaggerated to get attention. They told me I was forbidden from speaking to Miss Rivera again. Dad said therapy is a crutch for the weak-minded. Mom said our family problems should stay within the family, except she does not even admit we have problems. The final entries approaching my 16th birthday showed a growing determination to break free from their influence. I realized something today. No matter what I do, it will never be enough for them. If I cured cancer, they would ask why I had not cured heart disease too. If I won a Nobel Prize, they would point out someone who won it younger. If I became president, they would criticize my inauguration speech. The problem is not me. It never was. The problem is that they are incapable of being satisfied, of being proud, of loving unconditionally. Maybe they do not know how. Maybe their parents were the same way. Maybe they are just broken in some fundamental way that makes them unable to see me as anything but an extension of themselves, a project rather than a person. I cannot fix them. I cannot make them love me the way I deserve to be loved. All I can do is stop destroying myself, trying to earn something that should have been freely given from the day I was born. From now on, I will live for me. I will find people who value me as I am. I will create a life that brings me joy, not just achievements to list on a resume. I will be the parent to myself that they never were. I will love myself unconditionally. This is my promise to myself on the eve of my 16th birthday. The next chapter of my life begins now. Reading these entries as an adult, I was struck by both the pain they contained and the wisdom. That 16-year-old girl had seen the truth so clearly, had made a promise to herself that I had only partially kept. I had found some people who valued me authentically, Marcus chief among them. I had achieved professional success that brought genuine satisfaction. But I had never fully broken free from the psychological hold my parents had on me. Until now. I spent that evening selecting specific entries to highlight the ones that most clearly illustrated the pattern of emotional neglect and impossible standards. I wrote a note to accompany the diary, explaining my decision to cut contact and start fresh across the country. Mom and Dad. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I am moving to Seattle to accept a new position. I do not plan to provide you with my new address or phone number. I am leaving behind this diary so you can understand why. These are my words written as a child who desperately wanted your love and approval. A child who could never understand why nothing she did was ever good enough. Now, as an adult, I finally understand. Nothing would ever have been enough because the problem was never my performance. The problem was your fundamental inability to offer unconditional love. When you told me you regretted having me, you confirmed what I have suspected my entire life. I was never a daughter to you, only a disappointing investment. I am done trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I am done measuring my worth by your impossible standards. I am done. Do not try to contact me. I will reach out if and when I am ready. Brielle. I placed the note inside the diary, closed it, and set it aside. In 2 days, I would drop it in their mailbox on my way to the airport. The thought brought both anxiety and a profound sense of liberation. The final days before my departure passed in a whirlwind of activity. I terminated my lease, sold most of my furniture, and shipped the essential items I wanted to keep. Marcus helped me pack our conversations, alternating between practical logistics and emotional processing. Are you sure about this? He asked the night before my flight as we sat on the floor of my nearly empty apartment sharing takeout Chinese food, cutting them off completely. I have never been more certain of anything I said. 28 years of trying to earn their love is enough. I am done. And us? He asked quietly. That question was harder to answer. I cared deeply for Marcus, but I also knew I needed to focus on my own healing. I do not know, I admitted. I care about you. I do not want to lose you. But I also need to find myself without defining my worth through anyone else's eyes, even yours. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Long distance sucks, but it is not impossible. And Seattle has a pretty good design scene. I could look into opportunities there once my contract ends in 6 months. No pressure either way, I said. Let us see where we both are when that time comes. The next morning, I completed my final packing and loaded my remaining luggage into a taxi. Before heading to the airport, I had one last stop to make. My parents' house stood quiet in the morning light, both their cars gone as expected. They would be at work, my father at his law office, my mother at the hospital. I approached the mailbox, the diary heavy in my hands. For a moment, I hesitated. Was this the right decision? Would exposing my childhood pain change anything? Would they even care? In the end, it did not matter whether they cared or understood. This act was for me, not them. Leaving the diary was my way of speaking my truth, of refusing to carry their toxic legacy with me to my new life. I placed the diary in their mailbox, raised the small red flag to indicate delivery, and walked away without looking back. The flight to Seattle was 6 hours of liminal space, suspended between my old life and the new one awaiting me. I used the time to continue processing, journaling my thoughts and feelings as the landscape below transformed from the familiar East Coast to the unknown West. Seattle greeted me with uncharacteristic sunshine, the city gleaming between water and mountains. My temporary corporate housing was a sleek downtown apartment, minimalist and impersonal, but with spectacular views of Puget Sound. Standing at the window, watching ferries glide across the water against a backdrop of snow-capped mountains, I felt the first genuine stirrings of excitement about my new beginning. The next week passed in a blur of orientation meetings, apartment hunting, and exploring my new city. West Coast innovations proved to be everything the recruiter had promised: creative, dynamic, and refreshingly different from the East Coast corporate culture I was accustomed to. My new colleagues dressed casually, spoke openly about work-life balance, and seemed genuinely interested in my ideas rather than just my performance metrics. My direct supervisor, Jasmine, was particularly welcoming. "We are excited to have you on the team, Brielle," she said during our first one-on-one meeting. "Your portfolio is impressive, but what really sold us was your perspective on integrating traditional marketing strategies with emerging digital platforms. We think you will bring a lot to our team." Her praise was offered simply and directly, without the qualifications or criticism I was accustomed to. I found myself flushing with pleasure and struggling to accept the compliment gracefully, a skill I had little opportunity to practice. "Thank you," I managed, fighting the urge to deflect or minimize. "I am excited to be here." "One thing you should know about our culture," Jasmine continued. "We celebrate wins here, big and small. We also learn from failures without shaming anyone for taking calculated risks. It might take some adjustment if you are coming from a more traditional corporate environment." She had no idea how much adjustment it would require. The concept of celebrating success rather than immediately raising the bar higher was foreign to me. The idea that failure could be viewed as a learning opportunity rather than a character flaw seemed almost revolutionary. By the end of my first week, I had secured a small but charming apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, a vibrant area filled with independent shops, restaurants, and a diverse community that felt worlds away from my Connecticut upbringing. The apartment had original hardwood floors, large windows, and a tiny balcony just big enough for a chair and some potted plants. It was nothing like the pristine magazine-worthy spaces I had always maintained, but it felt right for this new chapter. I established new routines that prioritized well-being over achievement. I found a local coffee shop where I could work on weekend mornings. I discovered a yoga studio that emphasized mindfulness over perfect form. I explored the city's parks and waterfronts, taking time to simply exist in nature without a goal or purpose. Marcus and I spoke daily, our connection, maintaining its strength despite the distance. He listened as I processed my emotions about the diary, my parents, and my new beginning. "Have they tried to contact you?" he asked, about a week after my departure. "No," I said. But I did not really expect them to. They probably have not even found the diary yet, and even if they have, their most likely response will be anger at my dramatic gesture. Or maybe they will actually read it and have some kind of epiphany, he suggested. I laughed, though not unkindly. You are an optimist, Marcus. It is one of the things I love about you. But my parents do not do epiphanies. They do cold rationality and self-justification. I found a therapist in Seattle, Dr. Patel, who specialized in adult children of emotionally abusive parents. Our first session was intense, but validating. What you have described is a classic case of narcissistic parenting, she said after I shared my history. Children of narcissists often struggle with perfectionism, anxiety, and a deep-seated belief that they must earn love through achievement. That describes me perfectly, I admitted. The good news is that awareness is the first step toward healing, she said. And making this physical break moving across the country can create the space you need to develop a stronger sense of self, separate from their expectations. We established a weekly appointment schedule and set initial goals focused on recognizing and challenging the internalized critical voice that sounded suspiciously like my parents. Dr. Patel also recommended a support group for adult children of narcissistic parents, which I tentatively agreed to try. As the 1-week mark of my departure approached, I found myself wondering whether my parents had discovered the diary yet. Had they read it? Had it affected them at all? Part of me hoped it had shaken them to their core, forced them to confront the damage they had done. A more realistic part expected they had dismissed it as childish melodrama or worse evidence of my oversensitivity. Either way, I reminded myself, their reaction was no longer my concern. My life was here now in Seattle, in this fresh start I had created for myself. For the first time in 28 years, I was living for myself rather than for their approval. And it felt like freedom. Unknown to me at the time, my parents did indeed find the diary, though not immediately. Their demanding careers meant they often did not collect mail for days at a time, and it was not until Friday evening, nearly a week after my departure, that my father happened to check the mailbox on his way into the house. The small leather-bound book with its accompanying note puzzled him initially. As he carried it inside, my mother was preparing dinner in their immaculate kitchen. "Eleanor, did you order some kind of journal?" he asked, holding up the diary. She glanced over with mild interest. "Number, what is it?" He opened it to find my note resting inside the cover. His expression darkened as he read. "It is from Brielle," he said, his voice tight with irritation. "Apparently she has moved to Seattle and does not wish to provide her new contact information. She has left this childhood diary as some sort of explanation." My mother set down her cooking utensils and wiped her hands on a towel. Seattle. She accepted that position she mentioned at Christmas. "It seems so," my father said, scanning the note. "She references our dinner conversation. She claims she is done trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Typical dramatic overreaction." He handed the note to my mother, who read it with a frown. "What does she mean?" We confirmed we regretted having her. We simply acknowledged that parenthood involves trade-offs which any rational adult understands. "Exactly," my father agreed. And now this theatrical gesture, leaving her diary like some adolescent cry for attention. He flipped through the first few pages dismissively. "Listen to this. Dear Diary, today, I won the science fair. My volcano was the best one because it really exploded with real red lava. As though we were supposed to rearrange our professional obligations for a primary school. Science fair." He continued reading random entries aloud with a mocking tone, treating them as evidence of childish sensitivity rather than legitimate pain. My mother listened with a mixture of dismissal and growing discomfort. "Richard, perhaps we should read it more carefully," she suggested, as he prepared to toss the diary aside. "If nothing else, to understand what provoked this extreme reaction." "If you insist," he said with a sigh of long-suffering patience. Though I fail to see how the scribblings of an 8-year-old are relevant to an adult's decision to cut contact with her parents. They sat at the dining table, the diary between them. My father began reading entries chronologically, his tone still dismissive but less openly mocking. As they progressed through the early entries, my mother grew increasingly quiet. The entry about the report card with all A+, except for the A- in handwriting, caused her to shift uncomfortably in her seat. Did we really focus only on the handwriting grade, she asked. We were trying to instill attention to detail, my father replied, though with less certainty than before. They continued reading the atmosphere in the room, growing heavier with each entry. When they reached the one where I had overheard them comparing me to Dr. Wilson's daughter and discussing my genetic shortcomings, my mother's face paled. I remember that conversation, she said quietly. I never thought she might have heard us. She was supposed to be asleep, my father said, but the justification sounded hollow even to him. The entries from my early teens proved even more difficult to dismiss. My descriptions of anxiety attacks, of comparing my home life to friends' families, of recognizing the abnormality of their parenting style, all painted a picture they struggled to rationalize away. When they reached the entry about my meeting with the school counselor who had used terms like emotional neglect and narcissistic tendencies, my father's defensiveness surged. That counselor was completely unprofessional, he insisted. She had no business making such accusations based on a child's one-sided account. But Richard, my mother said, slowly, look at the pattern Brielle is describing. The consistency across years, across different situations. Could everyone else be wrong? The counselor, Brielle's teachers, presumably her therapist now. His jaw tightened. Are you suggesting we were bad parents? We provided everything. The best schools, extracurricular activities, educational opportunities most children could only dream of. Material provisions, yes, my mother acknowledged. But according to these entries, she believed our love was conditional on her performance. That is absurd, he said, but with less conviction. They continued reading. When they reached the entry about my 12th birthday, which they had forgotten entirely due to work commitments, my mother's composure finally broke. We forgot her birthday, Richard, she said, her voice uncharacteristically emotional. She waited all day for us to remember, and we never did. She wrote that she cried herself to sleep. We were both dealing with critical professional situations, he reminded her. We celebrated the following weekend. With a practical gift and dinner at a restaurant where you spent half the time on your phone, she said, the memory, returning with painful clarity. No cake, no singing, no friends invited. We treated it like an obligation to be fulfilled efficiently, rather than a celebration of our child. The entries documenting my achievements one after another, each met with indifference or criticism, created a damning cumulative effect. National Merit Scholarship response. As expected. Lead role in school play response, no attendance. Breaking school track records response comparison to Olympic athletes who were truly exceptional. By the time they reached my 16th birthday resolution, my father's defensive anger had given way to uncharacteristic silence. My mother was openly crying, something I had witnessed perhaps twice in my entire childhood. We failed her, Richard, she said, her voice breaking. Not academically or materially, but emotionally, fundamentally. We were trying to prepare her for a competitive world, he insisted, but the argument sounded weak even to him. No, my mother said with sudden clarity. We were trying to create the perfect child to validate our own exceptionalism. We treated her as an extension of ourselves rather than as an individual with her own needs and feelings. The realization hung in the air between them, too painful to immediately accept, yet too obvious to deny. And now she is gone, my mother continued, wiping tears from her face. She has cut us off completely because we told her we regretted having her. How could we say such a thing to our child, Richard? We did not say we regretted having her specifically, he tried to argue. We said there were times we regretted having children in general given the career limitations. Do you honestly believe that distinction matters? She asked. To a child who spent her entire life trying to earn our approval, we confirmed her deepest fear, that her very existence was a disappointment to us. My father rubbed his face, a rare gesture of distress from a man who prided himself on emotional control. What do you suggest we do? She has not provided contact information. We find her, my mother said firmly. We apologize. We try to make amends if that is even possible after all this time. And if she does not want our apology, if she truly wants no contact, then we respect that decision, my mother said. But we have to try, Richard. I cannot live with myself if we do not at least try. They began calling my former workplace in Boston the next day, only to learn I had resigned 2 weeks earlier. They attempted to reach Marcus through information from mutual acquaintances, but he refused to provide my contact details, saying only that I was doing well and needed space. In desperation, they drove to my Boston apartment, finding it empty and already being shown to prospective new tenants. The property manager confirmed I had moved out of state, but declined to provide forwarding information. Standing in the empty apartment that had been my home, my parents finally confronted the reality of my absence. This was not a temporary emotional reaction that would resolve itself with time. I had methodically removed myself from their lives, leaving nothing but a childhood diary as testament to the damage they had caused. "What have we done, Eleanor?" my father asked, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable as they drove home in silence. She had no answer that could ease the growing weight of recognition settling upon them both. 2 months passed in Seattle each day, bringing me further into a life built on my own terms. My work at West Coast Innovations proved challenging and rewarding, with colleagues who valued collaboration over competition. My apartment had transformed from an empty space into a genuine home filled with plants, art, and furniture, chosen for comfort rather than appearance. Most importantly, I was developing a sense of self separate from achievement. Therapy with Dr. Patel continued weekly, supplemented by the support group she had recommended. Listening to others with similar experiences helped normalize my own, reducing the shame and isolation that had colored my understanding of my childhood. Marcus and I maintained our connection through daily video calls and weekend virtual movie nights. 3 months into my Seattle life, he visited for a week, and the joy of showing him my new world confirmed what I already suspected: our relationship was worth preserving. We began discussing the logistics of his potential relocation once his current contract ended. I had experienced no contact from my parents. Part of me was surprised, having expected at least an angry email about my dramatic departure. Another part was relieved, taking their silence as confirmation that I had made the right decision. They had likely read the diary, been briefly offended by my overreaction, and moved on with their lives unburdened by the disappointment I represented. So, I was completely unprepared for the letter that arrived at my office in early April, forwarded by my former employer in Boston. The envelope contained a single sheet of my mother's personal stationery, not the monogrammed professional letterhead she typically used. The handwriting was hers, though less perfectly controlled than usual. "Dear Brielle, we found your diary. We read every word. We have spent the past months trying to locate you to apologize in person, but respect that you do not wish to be found. There is no adequate way to express our regret for the pain we caused you. Your diary forced us to see ourselves through your eyes, to confront the damage our parenting inflicted. The truth is devastating. We never intended to hurt you. That may seem impossible to believe, but our flawed belief system led us to think we were preparing you for success. Instead, we denied you the unconditional love every child deserves. We are both seeing a family therapist to understand how our own upbringings created the parents we became. This is not an excuse, merely context. The responsibility for our actions remains entirely ours. If you are willing, we would like the opportunity to apologize properly. If not, please know that we understand and accept your decision. Our love and support are yours regardless, with no expectations or conditions." Your diary ended with a promise to yourself at 16. We hope that 28-year-old Brielle has fulfilled that promise and found the joy and self-acceptance you so richly deserve. With love and profound regret, Mom and Dad. Enclosed was a business card for their therapist, with a note saying I could contact her to verify they were genuinely in treatment, along with both their personal cell phone numbers. I sat at my desk, reading and rereading the letter, emotions swirling too intensely to immediately process. This was not the defensive, dismissive response I had expected. The acknowledgement of harm, the lack of justification, the absence of guilt-inducing language, all suggested a level of genuine reflection I had never witnessed from them. I brought the letter to my next therapy session, where Dr. Patel helped me work through my conflicted response. "What do you want to do with this information?" she asked after reading it. "I do not know," I admitted. Part of me is skeptical, wondering if this is just another manipulation. Part of me wants to believe they have actually changed. And part of me thinks it does not matter either way, that I am better off maintaining distance regardless. "All of those reactions are valid," she assured me. "There is no rush to decide. You can take time to consider what, if any, response serves your well-being." I decided to do exactly that. I put the letter away and continued focusing on building my new life. I discussed it with Marcus, who offered support without pressure in either direction. I brought it up in my support group where others shared their experiences with estrangement and attempted reconciliation, some successful, many not. After 6 weeks of reflection, I composed a brief email to my parents. I received your letter. I am not ready for direct contact yet, but I am willing to exchange emails. This is not a promise of reconciliation, only an opening for conversation. Any attempt to locate me beyond this email exchange will result in immediate termination of contact. Their response came within hours, thanking me for the opportunity and respecting my boundaries. Over the following weeks, our exchange evolved from cautious and formal to increasingly substantive. They shared insights from their therapy about how their own emotionally neglectful upbringings had shaped their parenting approach. They answered my difficult questions about specific incidents from my childhood without defensiveness. They expressed genuine interest in my new life without judgment or comparison. 3 months into this email communication, I agreed to a video call setting clear boundaries about duration and topics. The sight of them on my laptop screen, looking somehow older and less intimidating than in my memory, triggered a complex emotional response. My father's typical perfect posture was slightly stooped. My mother's composed expression showed new lines of stress or remorse. "Brielle," my mother said, her voice catching, "thank you for agreeing to speak with us." The conversation was stilted at first, all of us hyper-aware of old patterns we were trying to avoid. But gradually, we established a new way of interacting, one based on authentic communication rather than performance evaluation. "We were wrong," my father said near the end of the call, the words clearly difficult for a man who had built his identity on being right. Not just about the things we said at that last dinner, but about our entire approach to parenting. You deserved better. Yes, I did. I agreed, the simple acknowledgement representing a seismic shift in our family dynamic. We established a schedule of monthly video calls, supplemented by emails. I maintained firm boundaries, ending conversations that veered into old territories of judgment or comparison. They respected these limits, suggesting they were indeed doing the difficult work of changing ingrained behaviors. 6 months after that first video call, they asked if they could visit Seattle. After consulting with Dr. Patel and much personal reflection, I agreed with specific conditions. They would stay in a hotel, not my apartment. We would meet in public places. The visit would last 3 days, not a week, as they initially suggested. Most importantly, I reserved the right to end any interaction that became unhealthy. Their visit was neither a perfect reconciliation nor a complete failure. There were awkward moments, brief slips into old patterns quickly corrected, and periods of genuine connection. We toured Pike Place Market, took a ferry to Bainbridge Island, and had dinner with Marcus, who had relocated to Seattle 2 months earlier. On their final evening, my mother presented me with a small package. Inside was a journal similar to my childhood diary, but elegant and adult. "We thought perhaps you could use this to document your new life," she explained. "The happier one you have built for yourself." The gesture was simple but meaningful, acknowledging both the pain of my past and the promise of my future. As we said goodbye at their hotel, my father asked hesitantly, "May I hug you, Brielle?" It was the first time I could remember him requesting rather than assuming physical contact. I nodded, and his embrace was careful, respectful of the fragile new connection we were building. In the years since that visit, we have established a cautious but increasingly genuine relationship. They have continued therapy, demonstrating consistent effort to understand and change their behaviors. I have maintained my boundaries while gradually opening myself to the possibility of a healthier family connection. I do not know if we will ever have the warm, easy relationship depicted in movies or enjoyed by friends with loving parents. Too much damage was done over too many years for complete healing. But we have found a way forward based on truth, respect, and earned trust. The journey from that devastating dinner to today has transformed me in ways I never anticipated. I learned that speaking my truth, even when terrifying, can be the first step toward authentic freedom. I discovered that boundaries are not selfish but necessary for healthy relationships. Most importantly, I found that my worth was never dependent on achievement or anyone else's approval. To those of you watching who recognize your own experiences in my story, Please know you are not alone. Whether you choose reconciliation or distance from toxic family relationships, your priority must be your own well-being. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away. Sometimes the strongest choice is to open ourselves to the possibility of change while protecting our hard-won peace. Have you ever had to make difficult decisions about family relationships? How did you find the courage to prioritize your own health and happiness? Share your stories in the comments below, and please subscribe if this resonated with you. Your experiences might help others feeling trapped in similar situations. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember that you deserve unconditional love and respect, not as a reward for achievement, but simply because you exist. That is the truth I wish I had understood all those years ago, and the message I hope you carry forward in your own life.